Yeah, and that's actually something that we're pretty interested as well on the CBDC side. And so with the CBDC, something that comes up a lot is the lack of privacy factor, or the fact that, Big Brother is now watching you, at all times, basically, right? And, with cash today, people are very comfortable with their cash transactions. Every single day, people are making private transactions, right? And with the invent of a CBDC, in theory, that kind of goes away, right? Now that Big Brother can see everything you're doing. And so is there sort of a pitfall to the CBDC model where now they know everything that we have going on, or should a privacy mechanism be introduced to it somehow?
Well, I think like everything in life, Jared, that the devil's in the details, right? So when you look at, I don't think anybody on this panel, and I'm thinking maybe even in the participants gallery, would be kind of in favor of moving to a digital yuan, right? Because we know that that's loaded with things that we just, as Americans, we're not going to find very savory. So when you go to CBDC in the United States, for example, well, how is that going to be implemented? Nobody knows. Is Big Brother going to be looking over your shoulder? I am sure that no matter how it's implemented, everybody's going to be saying, well, people are tracking me, like like the chip in the vaccine, right? So you're always going to have 50% of the country saying one thing and 50% of the country saying another thing. That's just kind of the way that that we are right now, unfortunately. But more to Dina's point about stable coins and regulation. Should they be regulated? Should they not be regulated? Again, the devil's in the details. I think it really depends. You have a couple of proposals out there, most notably, I'm sure that we'll get to the FTX proposal for clearing, right? Well, if FTX is going to become a DCO or DCM, designated clearing organization, for those of you in the audience, which will then be regulated by the CFTC and then be able to offer futures, which are then based on a stable coin, well, then you can kind of see what the problem would be with maybe having an unregulated stablecoin. Now, full disclosure, I am not a regulation heavy guy, right? But what I'm just saying is, logically speaking, if you want to be a DCM or if you want to be a DCO and you're going to offer a product based on another product that's not regulated, well, we've got to figure out what the construct is there, and we've got to figure out how that's going to kind of blend into the existing system of regulation, or just don't be regulated.
I tend to agree with that, and I look at it from the perspective of you. We're comfortable today, and the government's comfortable today with, as was previously mentioned, like private transactions. But then on the flip side, then why would we then give up privacy for the convenience of the technology, right? Like, so like privacy provisions will have to be put in there, and there should be some table stakes around things like sanctions enforcement and KYC, things like that. But then your transactions, you should still be able to transact privately, right? Like, I mean, the whole country got into a huff when Joe Biden said, "Hey, I just Venmoed, my grandchildren, some cash," and then we all saw the transaction, right? And then Venmo quickly changed, the privacy rules, right? So I feel like we're all following this, right? So it to me, it opens up a big can of worms.
So let me add to that. So, I know a lot of people talk about the U.S. being behind because we don't have a central bank digital currency. I don't know if we're behind. I think we're wise. I would never use the digital yuan. Like, I don't want people to be tracking how much time maybe they're going to be tracking somehow my kids' video games or something like, or tracking, say, oh, she buys too many sweets, or telling me knowing about all my doctor's appointments, or all my pets. Like, it's none of the government's business, right? So I think the fact that we're moving slowly, and even Janet Yellen has said that central bank digital currency will take a number of years to develop. And then we do have to consider privacy. So the reason there's talk about the central bank digital currency is because other countries are doing it. But I also think that there's a fear in terms of the dollar being the reserve currency. That's why you had so much fear about Libra. Libra just needed to headquarter itself in US and be US stablecoin, right? But what I would say in terms of the dollar remaining the reserve currency, obviously it has to do with people trusting the dollar because they trust our government. It's not perfect for sure, but they trust our government, where they trust our legal system. But just as importantly, the US has the most robust private sector. And so, if you brought CBDC in it and you define it very broadly, you're going to push out that innovation in the private sector. That innovation in the private sector in terms of payments, the brands I was mentioning before, part of the reason that the dollar is the reserve currency is because our payment systems are name brands that people know and they're all over the world. So we want to create the best new rails that we can. And so they're used globally and we can continue. I know some anarchists won't agree, but we can continue to maintain the dollar as the reserve currency. It's certainly, in terms of sanctions and things like that, it's certainly a lot cheaper and less dangerous than the US having to spend even more on defense or put more boots on the ground. There's a lot of, so my view on the central bank digital currency is that the Fed should view it as a technology upgrade. They need to be careful how they do that upgrade because the technology is still rapidly changing and it should replace the rails that they run today. And maybe partner up with the private sector in terms of the interfaces. I'm not a tech person. Interfaces in the US and the interfaces globally as well. I think there's been a lot of talk about how that central bank digital currency would be a solution for the unbanked and the underserved. I am very skeptical of that because I know about the unbanked in the US. I spent many years working on those issues. The unbanked, many of them are, people from other countries that didn't trust their banks, people that have had a bad experience at banks. They use check cashers and things like that. They're very nervous about banks, right? So, and authority. So if the Federal Reserve, I don't think they would take over every bank account. That would be a disaster. That would be like, like the VA, like some of the, the government couldn't get all the cash out the door when it came to stimulus checks and stuff. So, but when you talk about financial inclusion, in setting up a Fed account, do you think the undocumented immigrant is going to run and sign up for a Fed account? I highly doubt it. Do you think someone that's mostly operating in cash, living paycheck to paycheck, is going to want to open a Fed account? Nope, I highly doubt it. So I think it's the wrong approach. I do think that the smartphone, responsible social media, maybe phone carriers, companies that have great reach, have a better ability to bring financial services into the mainstream. And even though we all are, we are concerned about social media and its largesse and things like that in competition, most of the country, when you get off the East and the West Coast, they like their social media and use it, right? So it can be easier to reach them in terms of like banking them. So those are my thoughts. Like the last thing I'll say about it is that, again, I am not a technologist, but we do have digital money today. that moves on something, right? I have no idea how it works on the internet, I guess. You know, when I buy something, I go and I buy a purse. I don't even like think about how the money is moving back and forth, right? It just happens, and it happens like fast and efficiently. So when you think about stable coins, and the underpinnings of the technology, like proof of work, proof of stake, those kinds of things, we have to be really careful, because what comes next after proof of stake? And also, what will we get to a point, and this may scare people, where blockchain or DLT, and this is in the future probably, runs by itself, almost with AI. And normally, you know, we're talking about stable coins and the technology underneath payments. Normally, I couldn't even tell you how it works now. Normally, we don't even think about it at all. We just do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.